The saying "before his time" swims circles in my mind. Tick, tick, tock, time ticks slowly. We lie in wait, wait in vain, hurry up and await the news of appointments and blood tests and scans. Before his time. Patience is a virtue. Fear is palpable. So is anticipation, anxiety, a touch of angst. Before his time. Time is his biggest regret, listing the things he could miss, remembering a wild and precious life. Time heals all wounds. Turn your wounds into wisdom. Breathe just a little. Call it a life. It's not his time. Not enough time. Never enough time. Beige walls painted gray, basked in the light of a 60-watt bulb. He wakes at 3 a.m. Light blares from the bathroom, loud and piercing, then quiets. He does not sleep. During the day, I hold us both together. Eating schedule, routine, appointments, a CBC original, and a family project. Anything to keep us moving, keep us eating, keep us distracted. Stay positive, we are told. Hope dissipates in the face of it. Steely insides refuse to feel. A carrying on instead. An ordinariness in spite of reality. It dissipates as afternoon gives way to night and fear returns to its throne. In the dark, a guttural choke reverberates inside my throat. My voice eludes me, evades me. It will not come forth. Blocked by a mass growing in his body, a hardened despair growing in mine. We plan a road trip up north. 3 days, 17 hours, 1,581 kilometers stretch between us and the place he used to call home. We plan pit stops along the way, take in the pictographs once viewed on a treacherous windy day, visit the places the group of 7 once inhabited. We take the long way there, enjoying the music and the company and the laughter. Visit friends and family and all the places he used to haunt. Soak in as much as we can before the equally long trek back. A road trip, just the 2 of us, in case we never get the chance again, in case we are running out of time.
So we just watched Caregiving by semi-finalist Kiera Obbard, and congratulations on your successful completion of the video poem. It's a beautiful poetry film, Kiera. Please hold on to all the questions and reflections till the end of the next film. Our next film is Around to It by our next semi-finalist, Michael Dodge. Really looking forward to watching together. But first, I would really love everybody to introduce themselves. Please introduce yourself. What do you do? Which city are you logging in from? And what are you excited about today? We're going to start with Kiera, Michael, and then we'll go around. Kiera?
Yeah, so my name is Kiera Obbard. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph here in Ontario. My SSHRC-funded project studies the complex economic, social, cultural, and technological conditions that have enabled the success of Instagram poetry within Canada. And I'm a poet as well on the side, so I have a dual interest in poetry, and I try to bring my academic interests into my poetry in different ways, and I hope that comes through in my work. I'm coming to you today from Kitchener-Waterloo, and I'm just really excited to hear everyone's feedback and to see the other film. This is the first sort of public screening that I've done of this piece, which is obviously very personal to me. So I'm just really excited to share it with you all.
Thank you, Kiera. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Dodge. I'm a filmmaker from the farmlands outside of Portland, Oregon. This is my third short film that I've directed, and I wrote and shot this film as a response to the death of my cousin. So much like Kiera, this is a personal project for me. It was an opportunity for me to kind of process through my grief and the whole situation.
Thank you, Michael. Ian?
Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you, Kiera. And it's nice to see you again. It's been a long time since I saw you last. You haven't changed. That's not fair. I am a professor of film and a filmmaker, and I live in Singapore. Currently doing my next funded film is on disability. Yeah, lots of other stuff, but that's all you need to know.
Thank you, Ian. Nidhi?
Hi, I'm Nidhi. I'm a lecturer of English at Sacred Heart University. I'm currently working on my monograph, which is called India's Daughters, Me Too, Politics of Forgetting, and examining partition narratives from 1948 to present. And it's looking at the depiction of rape in Hindi cinema, and specifically looking at how rape victims from the partition violence do not get represented, or from my dissertation, like a small data set. And I'm also working with archivists, with oral historians. I'm currently interviewing them for my final chapter. And I'm hoping to have the book and stuff done by the summer. So that is where I'm at. Yeah.
Thank you, Nidhi.
Yeah, I'm from Massachusetts. I'm joining you from Massachusetts today.
Okay, Boston.
Yes.
Okay, George?
Hi, my name is George Tsouris. I'm a professor of philosophy and Japanese literature with City University of New York. I'm also a filmmaker, a musician, and various other arts that I work with. Yeah, I'm very excited to see your films today, simply because I'm still in the midst of processing my own mourning and grief following my father's death a couple of months ago. So that was that's what I'm really looking forward to discussing today, and seeing how different artistic visions are manipulating and working with and working through those sorts of experiences. Yeah, I am logging in from New York City. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you, George. I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. A little bit about myself. I'm Samita Nandy from the Center for Media and Celebrity Studies, now sponsoring the Wall of Fame Film Festival in Lisbon. I am logging in from Toronto today, and very excited for our filmmakers and also our panelists. Huge thanks to Nidhi, Ian, and George for joining us today. Our film festival honors ethical filmmakers for social justice issues such as human rights, animal rights, sustainability, and important causes such as today's topic. We're talking about caregiving, grief, and loss, and ethics. And some way we are talking about survival. So we're going to explore all these themes together. First, we're going to watch Michael's film, Around to It, and then we're going to take all questions. All audience members who are joining us live, thank you so much for joining us. And please feel free to share your questions and introduce yourselves in the chat box. We're going to take all questions after the next film, which we're going to watch now. It's Around to It. So just bear with me for a few seconds, and we're going to watch it together. Thank you so much.
Oh, what do I have to do? No, not family. I'm her roommate. I really do. So it'll be how long? Did you say hours? Well, no, it's not that I expect you to be ready 24/7 like the fire department. It's just, well, I'm here with her. I suppose I could. It feels wrong to leave her alone even now. Sorry, I'm sure you'll be here as soon as you can. Well, she had this list. I've been meaning to get around to it, but... Thank you. I'll see you when you get here. Hello? She doesn't even have a Windows computer, you troll. Is that all she is to you? A bank account to be drained? Get a life! Okay, you got this. Hi, Tony? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? No, of course you're not. It's understandable. You're her brother. It's kind of hard to tell, because we just watched movies, but I don't think she was in any pain. At least not at the end. Are you gonna be all right, or should I call your mom? No, I know it's not my job, but it's not a problem. I can do it. I'm calling your grandfather anyway. I'm worried about you. Are you going to be okay? No, you don't have to just suck it up. And I'm pretty sure that crybabyitis is not a real condition. Yeah, they're on their way, but it'll be a few hours still. I'm sure they've done this before. It's not like they use furniture moving straps. Maybe just focus on your mom right now. I think in person is best, but... Okay, well, but be strong like a bull who doesn't crash his car. Yeah, just take care of your mom and yourself, Tony. Bye. Hello, Grandpa Felix? Grandpa Felix? No, I'm not Liana. I'm her roommate, Amanda. No, Liana was very sick. You should call your daughter. Call your daughter. Bye. Hi. I'm just calling to say that Haraya doesn't need to come to Liana's today. Not tomorrow either. She has. Just working through the last thing she wanted done. Yeah, it'll be a few hours till they're here, but I'll be here tomorrow to help. Not nearly enough. She's gone. Yeah, I really do. I'll be all right. I think it's all just hitting me now. I mean, I knew it was coming, but now that... Yeah. All right. Thanks. Bye. I told you she doesn't have a Windows computer. Who the hell are you? No, I can't put her on the phone. Because she's gone. Well, we were all depending on her. She won't be coming into work. She passed away. What is wrong with you? She's dead. Yes, deceased. You did know she was sick, didn't you? I think she had more important things to do than return her laptop to you, but I'll make sure that you get it. No, I'm not just saying that. I will get right on it. World's best boss. Hi, Shelby? This is Liana's roommate, Amanda. Yeah, the Liana from high school. But she just passed away. Yeah, thank you. Well, she told me how you hadn't spoken since high school. In fact, that's why I'm calling. She was the one who took your locket. Oh, well, she never forgot. And I think she held that for years. She was too embarrassed to apologize. She wanted you to have it back. So if you give me your address, I will send it to you. Oh, it's no problem. I'm glad to do it. Yeah, thank you. You too. Bye. Hi, Riley. It's Amanda. Liana is at peace, finally. It's okay. It's been really hard for everyone. Well, except her asshole boss. Yeah, I can't imagine how hard this must have been for her. I was with her the whole time, but, well, it's different watching it than living it. I had to go off her behavior. You know, when she would say she wore her emotions on her sleeve, and I would say she should take her jacket off so the rest of us could actually see them. Anyway, well, you know how much she regretted what she never said to her uncle. And, well, even after she lost the strength to say them, she had some thoughts she wanted you to hear. So, okay. Riley, speaking the unspoken is crucial. In the words of David Cassidy, so much wasted time. You are one of the few people in my circle of trust. Circle of trust is capitalized. It's a movie quote. You are one of the few people in my circle of trust. Ever since you swooped in when that lunatic thought I stole her money at the ATM, and when I caused a cleanup on aisle 7, and when my uncle died. You know what I mean to say, even when I don't. You're the first person I talk to in the morning, and the last person I talk to at night. I talk to you more than anyone else. I've never wanted to disappoint you or hurt you, and now I'm afraid I'm about to do both. When people tell me I'm brave, I know that's not true because I never spoke up. I think so. Love is like an owl. Just because it's silent doesn't mean it's not there.
We just watched Around to It by Michael Dodge. Congratulations on the successful completion of the film. I can imagine how hard it was to do this film. Very well done. Before we take questions and comments from our audience, any initial reflection that you have I'm asking our panelists here. Any initial reflection, thoughts, questions? Kiera, Ian, Nidhi, George?
One thing I didn't mention in my introduction was that I lost my mom in 2016 due to cancer. And it's only been very recently that I'm not haunted by like waking up all of a sudden and then just missing her. But one thing that I learned a lot from that passing and that nobody tells you is the aftermath of what happens in that loss. And like that list that was in the film, and as she was checking it off, there's not really any way that you can imagine it, and how much like and where you stand with that loss. And it's, even though like over time I think you accept it, that person is never coming back, but that um, the the disconnections that happen with family members or with people like that boss, or those sort of things, I think like they linger always. And that to me was the first thing I was thinking of. And I think what Kiera's poetry has done, I think poetry is a beautiful way of addressing trauma, I think. And I really love that the way in which the process of going through cancer and caregiving, having been there, it sort of reminded me of that difficult time again. And I was like exactly in this room when it all happened, so it's even more jarring. But yeah, that's my first thoughts that just came up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nidhi, for sharing. I was thinking of your mom. Any thoughts or questions from Ian and George?
One thing that really struck me about both films is how they both so deftly expressed the various emotions and various experiences that we can have in dealing with such challenges. I mean, we certainly saw, both films really dealt with that and brought back a lot of, anybody who's experienced this sort of experience or this sort of loss. I think there's so many diverse ways to address it and to live with it. And I really appreciated both films in dealing with, like I said, the diversity of emotions, the different emotions, the different experiences that we can live through in dealing with these sort of challenges. So thank you both for sharing this, both very touching films, very touching projects.
Thank you, George. Ian?
It's very hard to engage in the films because it just takes me back to grief. As George and Samita know, I lost both my parents during COVID, and I was in Singapore and they were in Australia, so it was a very difficult time. I'm constantly thrown by film's inability to deal with the, as Vivian Sobchak says, the co-anesthesia of grief. It's too enormous to capture on the screen. And you guys have both done the right thing. You've made evocative films for completely different reasons. I mean, the mise en scène of your film, the General Michael. Yeah. It's completely opposite to the way Kiera has done it. Kiera has a very full Baroque visual sense, and it's always difficult to follow the poetry of that when it's so difficult. But the minimalism of your film, Michael, is very touching. Is a very good actress too, so I'm very impressed. Don't think for a moment I'm criticizing your film, Kiera. I'm just saying I think it too full of emotion to be able to see the subtlety and the complexity of what that means for you. And I think that in that sense, film as a medium has let you down. And those of us in film theory know, 1,000 reasons why that is. But I'm feeling your pain, both of you. Yeah, lost 3 members of my immediate family, so it's impossible to look at your films without reflecting on our own lives. And I think in that sense, you've both been very, very successful with what film can do. It can't necessarily tell the complexity of your story, but it allows us to bring our story to it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think Ian put it really well. Also, there are 2 different films. I really loved the fact that Kiera used poetic devices because that helps to punctuate time and freeze time and also show the depth of that time, what it means to us, whether, we are sad or we're celebrating the moment. And during the process of the review, I also remembered that grief is just another word for love. And it's just the other side of the coin called life. So, really and truly, we are expressing our love. And when we create a poetry or, short film or a feature film, um, and we engage in different creative practices, really and truly, we're we're finding different ways to express that love and to rewrite and reimagine the life that we have had. And what resonated with me, both films actually, they honor so much of the loved one while going through the struggles, and it's very, very layered. Michael, spoke of, love and challenges and jealousy, so many different, layers come in. And it's very human, and to face, such a moment of loss, it's also an act of courage. It shows a lot of strength. So thank you both for addressing such very important issues. And I didn't mention, but the year I met Ian at our Los Angeles conference, 6 weeks before that, I lost my father, and he was very much part of our conferences and our seminars and everything, we did. And before that, a while before that, I also lost my mother. And I acknowledge that, I'm in a lifelong bereavement journey. And I still feel the loss is not directly actually from my mother or my father. I feel they are highly present. The loss is in other uh, extended family or friends or colleagues, and they are constantly, you know, on the losing end. So uh, the loss is actually more there. So just to, add to the conversation that I understand, I relate to it. We have a lot of thoughts coming in from our audiences. We have Christine from Kingston, and we have Diana from Austin, and she has some beautiful thoughts coming in. Any further questions about the creative process?
I just wanted to say something for Kiera's film based on what Ian had talked about. I teach a course on trauma literary theory in my courses, and one of the things that we talk about is Auschwitz and poetry, because Adorno, as you know, said that writing poetry about Auschwitz is barbaric, um, and so we question that with a very with a poet called Charlotte Delbo, who's known as like sort of the founder of Holocaust literature and things. If you haven't read her poetry collection, it's beautiful. It's called Auschwitz and After. And so she talks about how, so in her poetry, she's able to by using poetry, she's able to challenge the norms of what exists in terms of how we deal with grief, and how so she's able to like not just make the memoir about herself, but she's able to encompass the memory of 200 other women who were with her, and what they went through, and then also capture moments of like violence and of this and that through small poet, like, without having a structure necessarily. Which I think with what Kiera's film does is that it allows for that sort of engagement with the films, and it's a little bit. I feel like that's a lot of times we get intimidated by poetry, and I think that's where I think Kiera's contribution is so groundbreaking, as what Diana has said, because it allows for these conversations about grief to happen. Because when with grief, I don't think there's a set way. There's a except it's just whatever every individual feels as that's subjective. So for me, that's what I appreciated about Kiera's film, is that it allows us to think about grief in an unconventional but yet radical way, because it allows you to express yourself in what you said, Samita, what you feel fit with. Like that's how you feel comfortable. So the reason, and that's what works with students who don't like poetry but end up liking poetry because they're able to relate to it through something so powerful like that image of like this tension between what is poetry and how does poetry work with trauma. Um, so just a little
Thanks.
commentary. Yeah, just a little
Yeah,
commentary.
thanks, Nidhi. I wanted to ask you if you could write the name.
Yeah,
Um, of the author in the chat box so that we could all follow up. That's very interesting. Yeah. And speaking of being radical and also
Yeah.
transformative, I remembered what Bell Hooks also talked about. She talked about love ethics. I was very interested to hear about care ethics
Mhm.
from George Tsouris. Because I know George has extensively covered that topic in a couple of his philosophy lessons. And George beautifully talked about care ethics. I believe he talked about the community of care as well, and just the ethics around care. George, would you like to shed some light on that care ethics and also the good life, and the flourishing life that you may envision, through these two
How much
films?
time have we got? Yeah.
We do have time.
Yeah. I no, I would love to say so much about all that. I'm sort of torn right now. Yeah, you put me on the spot. Not that I can't bloviate so much about my own insights about these things, but one thing that I do appreciate regarding that ethical perspective, that feminist perspective, that care perspective, that I think both of the works are really touching on here. And one reason I truly appreciated both of the works by Michael and Kiera today is the fact that there's a different perspective. There's a different perspective to look at, and that is the caring perspective. And I think both of these films really touch on the different perspective, right? Yeah, so many of the care ethicists talk about the feminine perspective, and I think it's curious that both of the characters in the films were feminine characters. Yes. What do I mean by that? Is I think that there's a different perspective to be. I think it was nicely put by Michael's film. In Michael's film, the boss character. Now, by the way, you'll forgive me. I like to visit different perspectives frequently. I don't think the boss character is necessarily terrible, right? Despite the fact that we never meet or hear the boss character. Rather, it's not that the boss character is terrible or not, but rather that there's a different way of looking at things. Yes, the boss character deserves her computer, right? Nobody would deny this, yes, but there's more to life. There's more to the good life. To kind of address Samita's question, there's more to the good life than merely giving us what we deserve, right? The boss character clearly deserves her computer back. However, there is something valuable and something that does help, I think, lead and help our lives flourish when we do appreciate those other perspectives, that grieving perspective, the grieving perspective that both Kiera's protagonist expresses and also Michael's protagonist, such that, wait a second, that is part of life. That is part of life. And by the way, I'm sorry, Michael, I don't know, I like coming from left field sometimes. I sort of felt a little bit, how would you call it? I didn't like the protagonist for a moment when she was getting so angry, right? However, that's missing the point, isn't it? To focus on her anger, rather to appreciate her anger and to appreciate this new perspective that, my goodness, isn't anger part of a flourishing life too? Isn't being angry part of a healthy grieving process, perhaps? You forgive me, I'm not going to...
There's a book called Grief is Love, and in that it's about a daughter who kind of like talks about her mother's loss, and it came out I think last year. And I was just reading through it, and it said the exact same thing. She said, like, I was angry at my mom for being sick. I was angry at my mom because she was going through this, and I could relate to it because you feel frustrated because you want to be there for them, yet at the same time, like, as the caregiver or the person who cares for them, I think anger is, I think, part of that grief yourself because you don't have any control over it. I think that's the pain when you want to protect the loved one. And I think and it's so interesting that it's reverberated, this idea of anger and grief and love. Like, it's just this interesting nexus that creates within the framework.
Yeah, Michael, what are your thoughts on the reflections that George has and Nidhi has and Ian has? You are the filmmaker. I want to hear
Right.
from you. You had a very interesting creative process, in doing this film. You have a perfect soundtrack
Thank you.
and
Yeah.
light.
So that was based largely on the actual experience of my cousin. Her roommate was her primary caregiver for the last year and a half of her life. And the way I wrote the film, the intent was to capture kind of the pressure cooker that it was, because he spent the last year really, just like that, trapped in some sense in their place, just that focused pressure, and in some sense the isolation, right? Of so I tried to capture that a little bit in the film, and in particular the interaction with the boss that comes out of a real interaction that my cousin had with her boss, right? And I think it does show that there's different perspectives to the process. The boss has one perspective. The hospice company has a different one. That there are all of these different perspectives, and in this case, the caregiver is the one who has to bridge them all and has to shift in each different situation. And I think we can lose sight of that gymnastics that they have to do emotionally and psychologically. So the attempt was to show that there were so many different pieces, that list of things that's identified. And I have to say, I'm very happy that it has touched people, because my whole point behind this, right, was to share this experience a little bit, this human process of we all go through grief, we all go through these different things, and to be able to connect to other people. That's the whole reason that I make the films. So that was really nice to hear.
Can I chime in on that?
Yeah.
First of all, George, I hope you're doing well. I think you're holding up remarkably well since you lost your dad so recently, and it's a terrible thing to go through. It is a terrible thing. But I do have a different perspective to you, George, on the matter. I have to say, getting angry with the boss was just tapped into the essence of grief. There is something about there's so much pent-up emotion that comes out in all sorts of spiky directions. And yet when someone doesn't understand the nature of the grief and you lash out and she lashes out, then I thought my problem with it was that she didn't get angry enough. And, you think about when people, I'm sorry to say this during a conversation about grief, but when people suicide, one of the fantasies that they have is that this will really sock it to those people who effed me over all those years. And to get back at, to take revenge by taking your own life is very much a part of suicide. And I honestly thought, I don't know where you got your actress from, and I really liked her performance, but she could have gone much further in that aspect. And it seemed that processing the tenderer emotions was acceptable to her in her own morality. But I work a lot with actors, and I write books on acting, and I really feel that I wanted to see her get really mad. I wanted to see her throw that damn computer. I wanted to see her say, "Here's your computer." Wouldn't it be great if we passed on and someone championed us like that? And bosses are universally assholes. No doubt about that. I mean, I have the nicest chair in the world. But some of the people that work under her, I'm telling you. Now, I don't want to make that about me, although I certainly felt the opposite to that in my own experience. Now, I know this is Samita Mandy workshop, and therefore we're allowed to be a little bit emotional. I have to say, I spent my whole life being angry with my dad. And on his deathbed, I felt nothing but sorrow. And after he passed, I had no more anger for him. None. I did get angry about a year after he passed away when I discovered that my records were not playing properly, and that's because my dad took them out of the house and put them in the shed in the hot Australian sun, and he melted my records. I could not forgive him for that.
Yeah.
But, this is also the same dad whose ashes I scattered in the ocean in Australia. I have to say, I thought I wanted to see more of those dynamics in the performance of your actor and in your writing as well, because we know there are lesser plot points in emotional-based stories, but because it's not a psychological thriller that relies on twists and turns. But I felt as if I would have liked to see more of a range in her and more of a range in what you could bring out of her. Not criticizing your film, my friend. I think it's very brave to see.
I do have a response to that, but Michael, you'll
Yeah,
clarify.
absolutely.
I think
You
it
want to
depends
pick
on
up your
the-
computer and go, F you.
Oh, what did you do?
It is a roommate and not a family member.
Mm.
Now, I think the depth of emotion would vary from relation to relation.
Yeah.
Michael, can you clarify that? Do you feel, as a response to what Ian said, do you think the relationship matters? I know context matters, settings matter. This is a roommate. Do you think it would have changed if it was a family member?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, one of the reasons why the character of Amanda was just a roommate, is because in my cousin's case, that was the situation. And I found that fascinating that it wasn't a family member, that the person who put their life on hold for a year or more was a roommate. And I have not ever talked to the roommate to plumb the depths of why that was, but I just found that very interesting as a premise of here's a person who you might think has a little bit more distance, but who has committed in this way. And so certainly one of the things that I was trying to reflect in that character was the fatigue after a year of appointments and near the end, especially 24-hour-a-day care, that Amanda was just worn down by the process, right? And so there was this bit of fits and starts, and at first there's maybe a numbness, and then that slowly growing realization. So I think, it would have been different perhaps if it was the brother, let's say, instead of the roommate.
I was also thinking that there's also a premise in terms, if you have the roommate, there's also a question of empathy. Like how people empathize, especially given like our current world situation. Like there's so much with social media that you see constant videos, constant barrage of like death, and so I feel like one of the things that's happened as a result is that empathy has, like especially with students, like that's one of the questions I have, is the saturation of images making you less empathetic, because because you have it constantly in your mind, right? So you're not able to like have a distance from it to react. And I wonder, with having a roommate, that's the question, because you're able to see that that person has not a blood relation or anything, but because they're able to empathize with that such great manner that you don't need to have like a blood connection necessarily to empathize, because empathy is what's missing in today's world. I feel much more than it was maybe like, so when I was in high school, we had the tsunami happen, right, in the 2004 tsunami, and I was here, and I actually did grow up in Singapore as well. Yes. I lived there for like 7 years. Yeah, I lived in Malaysia and Singapore, so I have a very strong, I visit almost every 2 years we are there. But I was very much connected to that part of the world. So even though I did not see the images, I still went ahead and raised money for the stuff. But that was like, I didn't need those images. But right now, what's happening with the wars and stuff is that on Instagram, for example, like I know like a lot of people are advocating for, making us care. But there's so many images that makes me wonder, like with undergraduate students, are they having the same reaction that I did? Because I did not have those images unless I went and turned on the television to consume it. And I think that's the connection that I kept on thinking of, by not having the relative, but having a person who's not directly connected, you get to think about empathy and how
I
that.
wanted to, well said there. I'm sorry, you haven't finished.
No, that's all I had to say. Yeah.
Well said. And like anyone who's lived in Singapore and survived is okay by me. It's a tough society.
Oh, we were there from
Well,
95 to 90, 95 to like 01, and I still like.
that would have been an interesting time for
Oh
the
yeah,
world.
it was the best time. Yeah.
I want to just say, so your film, Michael, makes me think, well, there must be some further motivation in a roommate to stay with a person she knows is dying. And that's something I would have wanted to hear more about. And I think that, if you expand this idea, if you go for a longer film, then working out what her connection is. She sort of goes through a process of, isn't this awful that I have to do this and communicate to all these relatives of someone who just died behind those doors. I love that idea, by the way, that we never see behind the doors, and our imagination takes us to what kind of illness this person had. But it did make me think, I want to know what kind of person supports a dying person when they're not a relative. Mm-hmm. My sister, when my sister died, and I noticed one of the comments Scully earlier said that she'd lost her sister to cancer in 2016. I think it was around about that time I lost my sister to cancer. And my other sister is a nurse, a registered nurse, and she took a year off from her job to nurse her own sister. Now, I think that that's extraordinary motivation, but to do that, it's when it's the family connection, it's a little more understandable. But in your mind, Michael, was there something else that was driving her? How was her love for her flatmate motivated?
So this was not the case with my actual cousin. I have no idea, but in the script, there was an affection, a love, a unrequited love between the character Amanda for Liana, and that was part of the that last letter of Riley, as the deceased had written those feelings to another person, and that was kind of the torture of having to read that letter, right? To read those things that Amanda had wished that she had said to her, but now she has to read them to someone else. So
that came across very clearly, by the way, and I thought that was her finest part of the performance too. You established that really well. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's fine. So that was motivation, because yes, you're right. The level of commitment is so high that was one of the first things that got in my mind was what an amazing dedication, but also what is that motivation behind that? Because it's such a commitment.
That's what I would have wanted to see much more of. And it just for a moment, I've had this image pop into my mind from a film I saw. God, it must be 20 years old. George, have you ever seen the film Igby Goes Down? You're about the only one here old enough. Yeah, right. And
that sounds familiar. Yeah.
It was like one of the grown-up McCulkin kids.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
when Susan Sarandon dies, he seems disengaged, and this is where it connects to the earlier comment from Nidhi. There is a scene in that film in which he feels nothing for the whole film, and then when he goes to the corpse, he actually belts it. He thrashes her and says, "Why?" And you realize that it's all of that anger pent up. And I'm reflecting on your comment here, particularly when you talk about Adorno. And thinking, well, is there something in a sort of generational grief that knows it's lost something but can't quite articulate it as to why they bury themselves in their fucking mobile phones to the degree that they do? I feel it very much in Singapore, where the theory is the entire nation is in grief.
Yes.
because they were taken forcibly out of the kampongs,
Yep.
out of their villages, and put into an urban living space with
Mhm.
no emotional support whatsoever.
And they have
And
trouble expressing that emotions because you're raised
yeah,
to be
they won't
not.
even talk about it.
Yeah. That's how, in fact, like when I was growing up, like most of the time what would be is that in Singapore, like they'll teach you how to be much more kinder. So like you'll have like this kindness campaigns, and like Singapore like trains as when I was taking the train to schools and stuff, you'll see the kindness campaign, like be kind,
Yes.
be like, don't do this thing, don't
Sit
like
down,
all the moral lessons that are
Yes.
acceptable to them. So you couldn't think in a sense of like, okay, so if you rebel against it, then you were like less than. But going back to Adorno, I feel like with Holocaust as the example, people didn't talk immediately after the fact. Like even the survivors did not talk after the fact. There were very few memoirs that came out. The only one that I know that I've thought that came out in 46, called Five Chimneys, which is actually what Sophie's Choice, the novel, and then the movie is based on.
Right.
Then after that, until Eichmann trial, which was 1960s, when people started to finally say that yes, because a lot of times what would happen is when survivors would go to England or other places, they'll just be told, okay, we don't want to hear about it, don't talk about it. Much like partition, which is what I work on. But it's but then what happens as a result of that is that until and unless you talk about it, healing doesn't happen. So
It's absolutely right, and that's what the neuroscientists say.
yeah.
But of course, off the back of that, there was that brilliant book by Viktor Frankl.
Yes, Searching for Meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that book.
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning. And again, it's the same thing. I think it's that idea with that, like why Adorno I find really fascinating, because he comes from that Frankfurt school of thoughts. It's a very different, very hybrid. Yeah, and so I mean, but then at the same time, when you read Delbo's poetry, you see that like because she's able to use that medium as a way to break that sense of, so she's able to bring humanity. And I feel like there's just two different sides of humanity. One is that I don't want to hear about it, I want to move on, I don't want to think about it. So why are you expressing it in this kishy way, maybe in a popular culture way, versus if you heal like through poetry, how does that happen? Because poetry itself as a genre, I feel like is seen as lesser than other genres in general. I feel like maybe because I'm in the English department.
As literature.
I'm also from the cultural studies
from the cultural
background, so I understand.
Yeah.
We have a very important question from Diana, speaking of poetry. It's a question for Kiera. What inspired you to do films versus other media? Now, Kiera, you chose to do a poetry film, and it has been very inspiring to many people, and that includes me. I wrote my poetry and I performed a poetry, one of my first poetry, and you actually put it together as a film. So what inspired you to do films versus other media? How would you address that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things I want to say to this point. I don't think of this piece as just film. I think it's multimedia very clearly. So it includes, like video clips. It includes photographs from the year of my life where I was caring for my father, who, by the way, is still undergoing treatment, and he seems okay at the moment. So the grief that I'm talking about here is really a different kind of grief than Michael's film as well. And then I have these poems, and when I started with writing these poems, I was writing a fair bit throughout the year, and not thinking to put these into this video poem at all until his treatments had kind of come to, the first portion of his treatment had come to an end, and I was looking at these poems, thinking about what I would do with them, and looking back at all of the footage and the photographs that I had taken through the year. And to Ian's point, I felt, Ian had mentioned earlier that film kind of fails here, and I had felt that the poetry was failing to fully capture what I was trying to express itself. So I was looking for ways to mix these things together, to see what else I could get out of it, to see what other kinds of meaning could be generated here. And I think in that process, I was still living very much within my level of grief and uncertainty, and being too full of emotion for anything else, like having no other room for anything else in my life. And I think that's really reflected in the film itself. Like it's unpolished, it's imperfect, and it's quite raw. And I had the time to fix a lot of those things, and I chose not to. I chose to leave them as sort of a witness to my state as the filmmaker while I was doing this, and taking all of these pieces and putting them together throughout the year. So that's what I was trying to do, and I think it's an interesting experiment. You know, the whole process does still leave me unfulfilled in some ways in terms of what I'm trying to express, because I don't think that you can ever really express it, not to the full extent that you might want. And this makes me think back to what Samita said at the beginning about grief being love. And while through this whole year and while I was putting this together, I was thinking of this interview that Andrew Garfield, who plays one of the Spider-Men, he did this interview about losing his mother. And in it, he's crying. And the interviewer asks if he wants to stop. And he says, "No, I love talking about her. Don't take this as me not wanting to speak about her. I love to talk about her." And all of this grief is just the unexpressed love. And so that's what I was thinking about while I was making this as well.
Comes back to the same premise. Well said, Kiera. I mean, I was known you to be a very kind person yourself, and a very intelligent person, and that came across in your film rather beautifully. I wanted to express off the back of what you've just said, and in response to the film, that the most moving part of the film was that journey up north, that driving journey. And for the primary reason that film has not let you down, film has done you the right service, because we see the images. This is your father, correct?
Yes, that's right.
We see the images of your father, and the beautiful irony of seeing someone smiling whilst wearing the mask, and knowing the loss that involves with you. I'm very glad that he's still around. But when you cut to the images of going north, we don't see him. And that's like death in itself. That's like he is no longer. And certainly not knowing that your dad was still alive, I read it as, and now this is my reflection, in which the picture is set up that he is no longer a character within it. That was the most poignant. That was the best, and it was the best editing, and most fluid in the film. I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and actually at the time when I took those videos and I wrote that poem for that piece, we thought he wasn't going to be here. We had very bad news, and we were expecting that would be our last trip. And then when we came back from the trip a few weeks later, we had new scans done and had different news, thankfully. But
Wow.
That was absolutely that sort of specter of death was throughout that whole trip, for sure.
You did the right thing to take that trip.
Thank you. Yeah.
And just the return to nature is also healing. You know, it's part of the healing process that your dad is going through. And I just wanted to mention, when I saw your dad, he brought a smile to me. I was just very happy to see him. And I know he's going through more and more recovery. And yeah, I was just happy to see him. So yeah, and we have a couple of more comments coming in, and really thankful for Christine from Kingston sharing her reflections. Her sister also passed away. I always knew about that too. She also adds a comment here. She says, "I've seen Kieran Culkin." And okay, so she's responding to Ian, and I'm so sorry you lost your sister to cancer as well. Yeah. These stories of loss, they are, they are forever. They are forever. And I think the expressions of grief, they they come in different waves and different forms. And I was also very interested to learn about, what are the ethics around, caregiving, like it's also very important to have self-care. And sometimes that is challenged, and we're not necessarily taught about, boundaries or preferences. We're we're sort of molded in a productivity society, and that's what we learn, how to be productive. When we go to school, college, university, work, and then when we face loss, it's like, we don't have much of a vocabulary, we don't have coping mechanisms. So that's why a lot of people, they either stay or they run away. I mean, I have had the worst kinds of loss in the mortal world, right when a funeral happens or right after the funeral. Um, so it's very strange, it's like people just don't have the right set of vocabulary, but that's where films, short films, can be very precise, and full of, visual and audio, or soundscapes, like that could fill in that gap. I just wanted to add something else. Like, I never really went to bereavement counseling or anything. It just wasn't the right fit for me at all. I was very lucky to have my dad for the longest time, after my mom passed on. And I was a bit like Nidhi, I was doing my PhD, and, I was teaching and I was publishing. I remember my first publication while my mom was still at hospital. I thought she was coming home. She did not. Um, Anyhow, when my dad passed on, the hospice for 5 days at our home was just so pro-life, so powerful, that I gave up resistance, and I was like, okay, I'll try, bereavement counseling. So I did a group once, and I did one-on-one. Didn't work for me. I was always having my academic hat. I was always a sociologist, and they were getting angry with me. um, and
It was like us two banging on just now about like nobody wants to hear about your theories. We're talking about grief here.
yeah, I was very theoretical, but I learned that, even up until this time, that, I am a huge advocate for ethics, even if it's poetic justice for oneself. So for me, it's very individualistic. I do believe in a community of care. I strongly advocate for that, which, our society doesn't have much sometimes, but we do have. It's in, very specific places. Where I was going with this, that one bereavement workshop I did said something powerful at a sociological level. So that's where I resonated, I guess. and and the counselor said to everybody in a round table, said, we live in a productivity society.
Yep.
And for them, it's always about driving the car really fast on the highway. So when there is a moment of loss, people don't want to say, they don't know what to say, they actually run away.
Yeah.
And I've received the most ridiculous comments. Somebody close to my dad's age, when my dad passed on, within 6 weeks of the funeral. I think it was right before the LA conference, which was also happening at the same time. Kiera helped me a lot at that time in doing the programming. I just called her from the hospital and I told her, I don't think I have good news. I think it's bad news. So I just told her. But yeah, this person, he was a family friend. I thought a family friend. He actually said that was like within 5 to 6 weeks of my dad passing on, said that, oh, you just have to forget about it, like spilled milk. And this person kept adding me, deleting me because he wanted to be an influencer. I just realized, okay, he is very much programmed to be in a productivity society, to perform, and mortality is definitely not, matching the equation, right? So that's what he told me. I was shocked. I mean, because that was the most upfront comment I got. The rest was, silencing or distancing or, whatever shape or form. But that was the most upfront comment that I got from a productivity society. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I have to say, and certain panel members will agree with me. Living in Singapore is the hyper productivity society, and I remember coming. My country was burning. If you remember the Australian fires of 2019, and in the next year, losing both my parents. I remember coming into the kitchen at work, a bunch of academics. And this Chinese woman was in there, and she says, "Oh, how are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm feeling really awful, actually. I've just lost my mother and my father." And she went, "Oh, that's nice. Have a good day." and I swear to God, I nearly lost it, because, and just thanks for reminding me, because and George, take note of what Samita is saying. I have not fully processed my parents' loss. I haven't. And I know that, and it peeks its ugly head, and it's something that I've got to do. But at the same time, to survive in this Singapore society, showing your humanity is probably not the thing to do.
I still haven't, I don't know, like, so I lost her in 2016. I would have nightmares during my PhD, just like what Samita said. I made the PhD my survival kit, like, so working and researching became my like way to survive. But then later on, now that I'm done, and all of that, my body is reacting now. So the grief has now converted to my, like, I ended up with anemia. I ended up with, like, a lot of issues because of the fact that I was neglecting myself. um,
Uh,
so that was my physical way of telling, my body was telling me that you're so work obsessed, because that's like, I mean, in my family, my dad has always been like the workaholic person, and I've always modeled myself after my dad. And so, what has happened as a result of that is that it's been going great in terms of where I am career wise and all of that. But the biggest reaction was the health, right? Like the self care and the ethics of it, where, like, I mean, the first time when it happened, like Mike and I, we were so worried about, my dad, that we literally were here every single day from Connecticut. Every single day like every single weekend we'll drive 2 hours back and forth just to make sure that we were there with him until he went to India and stuff. And then after that, like, just recently I did my health check, like last year or something, and then the doctor was like, "Oh, you seem like you were okay." And then all of a sudden, I was like, "Wait, why are you like health reports like all over the place?" But that's the thing with grief, right? And I will confess, like Samita, I did not do grief counseling. I had my husband, who was my grief counselor in many ways, with him I would react in multiple manners. And having a goal like finishing my PhD, because my mom had wanted that, and thanks to Samita, then my mom was able to see my first big publication before she wasn't there anymore. Samita, that 2015 book that she was so proud of, that she shared on Facebook and everything. So she was able to see where I was. I joined this university where I am right now because, like, so just before she left us, I had just joined. So she was able to see those things. But I wouldn't be able to sleep properly. So for me, the biggest thing has been about sleeping, because what would happen is, as soon as I would close my eyes, my mind would immediately go to my mom, even if I had been working everywhere else. So I became very much like, okay, I might have to like take ZQL. I don't know, like take something to like help with sleeping. And that's something I'm finally confronting like now, because health is also like important, and that's something I've been neglecting for so long that, and I'm only in my 30s, and I'm still, and because I lost her, she was only 59. So when we lost her, she was barely, like, so
Yeah. My
yeah,
mom was 53. Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's very young. I
my
have a
dad was young
question.
too. My dad was 90. Is
Can I?
yeah. Sorry.
I-
sorry.
Yeah.
That's a long life.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. We
Yeah.
have one last question here. She's from the Film and Star Studies page, Sultan, and she has a question, and I'm wondering if anybody could address that. Visual tooling, the deep down emotion and pain. Why? So I'm assuming this is about visual storytelling. So very briefly, George, would you like to speak on that? Why do we use visual storytelling when it comes to emotions and pain?
Well, one comment that really resonated with me was Kiera's response and Kiera's expression of saying why she made her film and how she calls her film and whether she's trying to call it a film or multimedia or any of that. And, whether I am in total accordance with Kiera, here's what I loved about her response was when she said it was all an experiment. Right? It was all an experiment. And I hear so many different people talking about their own expressions and how they manifest anger or disappointment in other people's responses towards them. Right. But I'm constantly returning to Kiera's response that this is all an experiment. Right. You're talking
That's
about Adorno. Adorno certainly had his own beliefs about this. But if we go a little bit further into the future, to the modern skeptics, which they like to call themselves postmodernists, or other people call them postmodernists, or something like this. As much as I agree or disagree with those, with a lot of the crux of their ideas, there is something to be said about Kiera's insight that aren't we all just experimenting here? And I don't like being the bad guy here. Ian's already said he disagrees with me, and I, God bless him.
I'm being the bad guy.
And so, but that said, whether I have a little bit of sympathy for Samita's villain, who says, this is spilled milk, because I mean, listen, you could go back to the ancient Greeks. Who said something similar. By the way, the ancient Indians said something like this too, didn't they? Regarding these sorts of things and how we receive those notions. Certainly, I could understand that, the anger that we have when hearing, "Oh, my father is more than spilt milk." But that said, getting these different perspectives might help us understand different things slightly differently and process things differently to exactly, like I said, the piece that really resonated with me was Kiera's notion of experiment. Right. Yeah. And not even, this is what I loved about her comment about experiment, not even denying that this is a film, right? Denying that this is a film, calling it something else. Why? Because it's an experiment. An experiment in what? In exactly Rain's question, right? How are we making sense of all this? And as much as I hate all the postmodernists, they're onto something when they say none of this makes any sense. You can talk all you want about your reason and logic and rational thinking.
Yes, the other outcome of postmodernism is what Nidhi is talking about. Is like disengagement. Everything. What's the catch cry? Anything goes, so nothing works.
Yeah. Also, like, what is so is there supposed to be something to come out of trauma? Like, why is there an expectation of a product? It's a production thing, right? It's like, why are we expecting output? There shouldn't be an output. If it's an experiment, maybe it should remain an experiment, because that's what we all are, right? In the sense that, like, we're always in process. We're always in process, and if the more you unlearn, the more you learn, and then the more you unlearn, and then that's how you. I feel like that's the best way, in a way, to heal as well, because you're not, because if we keep on being focused on this, like, well, is it supposed to end to something? Why does it have to end to something? Why can't it just be existing and let that grief take its own course? I don't know if it's postmodernist or not, but I think it's the idea that, maybe, and I love what you're highlighting about Kiera's point about experimenting, because I feel like that's how we are post-COVID, aren't we? We are experimenting how to live in a post-pandemic life. If
Yeah.
it is a post-pandemic life, given that a lot of we're having a lot of cases of COVID in my, people are still having COVID.
And
So
we're still alive. We're still
right.
alive, and we're experimenting. Yeah. And
Bless you.
yeah, and I just wanted to again congratulate Michael, and Kiera as well, both of them, for having these short films on these topics. And just the format of the short film, it's so powerful. It doesn't have to, of course, I mean, if it's a feature film, then it could address, a lot of the questions that Ian had. What were the motivations behind the protagonist? Why was the roommate, like so close? And what were the motivations there? So I think that could be hashed out in a feature film. Perhaps, Michael, you have more reasons to do films now. But I like how short films are concise and they're sustainable and they're to the point, and at the same time they can be experimental, and that's something that Kiera showed so well. And just to finally answer what Sultan was also asking, like why visual storytelling, it just goes back to the goals of art to show the unseen. And there are many art philosophies, as George would know, but one of them is to show the unseen, to show the unheard. And in a productivity society where, we are trained to look at film in a certain, Hollywood or Bollywood blockbuster way, that is a product of patriarchal capitalism. It doesn't have to be that way. It is very ableist. I'm also trained in acting and filmmaking, and I know how ableist it is. There's very little room for cognitive diversity. But this is where the power of short films and poetry in particular, and film is very poetic. It's very rhythmic. It's very rhythmic. It's also very punctuated, and that's where films and visual storytelling in general could play a role. And I would say, to answer Sultan's question, is to show the unseen and to hear the unheard, perhaps. Any final thought on this? Today, we can continue the conversation. I mean, it's so heartfelt, it's so soul-centered, and at the same time, I know we have gone beyond time, but we didn't have to follow a productivity schedule, of course. Any final thought?
Yeah, may I want to celebrate Kiera's film. I want to celebrate a particular shot that I thought was utterly metaphorical to what we're talking about. And that is, your father was receiving some plaque and he was waving and he was very happy. But on the right-hand side of the frame, there was a woman's hands clapping, and it looked like a mirror reflection, but the illusion was that she was in another room. And it was very poignant, a metaphor for death, because the sense that something is happening in another room and that it was congratulatory, and the gesture of his waving was so celebratory, that the grief on top of that, with the darkness on one side, the mirror, the clapping, was a beautiful metaphor. And I hope that you know how good that shot was. And the fact that it wasn't perfectly framed, it was at an angle, it was on a Dutch tilt very slightly. That was the most powerful image I saw in your whole film. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's quite funny because my younger brother, who has no experience with filming anything, films that for me because I couldn't be there that day. And when I got it, I thought, oh, this is just really beautiful. He's accidentally and serendipitously stumbled on something that works quite well.
Yeah.
So,
and a better filmmaker wouldn't have done that. It would have seen it. I've got to reframe that out.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's quite good. I also wanted to say something about Sultan's comment about pre-grief. And for me, I feel like I'm still in that stage of pre-grief because this is ongoing. and yet it is also grief, right? A different kind of grief. It's maybe pre-full loss. But I just think that's such an interesting comment about the process of pre-grief. So thank you for sharing that. And I also wanted to say, so my father was set up with a social worker to speak with when he was diagnosed, and he's been speaking with them through the process. And one of the things that she said to him is that when you're going through something traumatic like this, you have to invite people in, because people will not feel comfortable. A lot of them will not feel comfortable talking to you about what's going on or asking questions. They don't want to burden you with their own feelings when you're already sick. And for me, that is just sort of a metaphor for the two films that we have today in this discussion, this process of inviting people in through our art, right? And inviting people to have these conversations, to look at, the hidden grief and struggle of a caregiver while they are caring for somebody who they love who may die or has died. So I just wanted to share that piece as well.
Kiera's spot on. The film I mentioned, not the film I mentioned earlier, but the next one I'm shooting is funded from research into palliative care. And it's specifically about caregivers in an Asian society who suffer much, much deeper than Westerners do in terms of, I don't want to show my grief because I don't want to burden others. That is absolutely, Nidhi is nodding here. The concept of filial piety and not being able to show, that's the central metaphor in that film. And I certainly hope it works. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I also add one more point? So with caregiving, I'm currently working on a paper about bystander witness. Like who's the bystander witness and what is the role of the bystander witness? Because when something is visible, it prompts you to act. So why are we not acting? And I'm working through it with like a different case in India and like relating it to Bilkis Bano case that's going on. And so that's the paper that I'm hoping to present. That I am presenting in MLA 2025 next year. MLA, yeah, the Modern Language Association. So yeah. But the role of bystander witness has come up again very recently when I was teaching Kite Runner. And there's a scene in that, and then it's that guilt that carries the main character forward. And that led to many of the students thinking about like what is our role when we witness something, right? And I kept on thinking about that even in connection with both what you're doing, and Kiera, your film, and Michael, your film too, because it's all about like this other person who's outside looking in, right? And so what is our role in this society where how much do we act and react to certain things, and how often we remain silent when we watch certain things, especially when you're going through and because you don't want to burden, as what you're saying, like your loved ones. So sometimes you don't say what you need to say. Like I have so much regrets of my mom, where I had many opportunities but I didn't act on it because I felt like if I do it, it might pain her, it might hurt her, it might do those things. And then I kept on thinking about like, well, what is our role, like as we witness certain things? Like shouldn't we speak up, shouldn't we like not say this, and the fact that and it's just a very interesting conversation with like when you tie it to the community of care, like what creates that community, and how do you ethically care for someone, and especially in a society like in Singapore or in Indian societies too, where what is your role, or any society where as a caregiver, and that so I'm still processing it, and I'm still like making sense of what that role is. But Kite Runner was like my inspiration for thinking about that role in different situations, of the idea of the
It's an ongoing process. And one last thing I wanted to add, both Caregiving and Around to It, both films, like many other films, have opened up space. And and somebody, again, it was Andrea from our conference series, she talked about space activism, and enabling space. And that is very powerful. It's in ways that are unsaid or unheard, but your films, Michael and Kiera, they open up space and they actually enable a community of care,
Yes.
and even if that community of care is existing in some shape or form, there are many different communities of care. It doesn't have to be monolithic. It doesn't have to be static, right? But you're one of those, rare films that are opening up those communities of cares, and what kind of preferences are there. And as caregivers, we also have to understand, like, okay, what kind of preferences, boundaries we should have, because this is not something that we have learned. So I'm still constantly learning. I have distant relatives and family friends who were not there for the funeral, and it was understandable. They were not even there during the caregiving process, but they are coming in right now. In the last 2 days, it happened after like 10, 20 years. I'm like, what's happening? So anyhow, so it's an ongoing process, lot to learn, but really, really proud of Michael and Kiera and all our panelists who joined us today for this ongoing conversation. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts before we sign off today?
No.
Michael?
No, thank you for having me. I actually have to drop off right now, but it was a great talking with all of you, and I'm glad that I was able to screen my film.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Congratulations.
Kiera, any final thought?
Yeah, just thank you all so much for engaging with my film and for the feedback. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
It was great to see you again, Kiera, and really congratulations.
Thank you. It's so great to see you all. Yeah.
And George and Ian and Nidhi?
I just want to last moment is to send love to Kiera and to George, especially since you have an ongoing grief situation.
Thank you.
Samita's given the right advice here.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And this is it's again another part of the healing is to talk about it, and having to like rehash and rethink and reflect. And Kiera and Michael's film both have left a lasting impression. And Samita, your thought about how these mediums of poems and short films is really resonating, and hearing the like, so I'm totally going to refer to you in certain things and quote you on those things, because I think they're really important, and I hope that we can continue this conversation more in the future, because I think this could be even something greater. Like, I think this is just really,
from Ian's next production and Nidhi's next publication, it seems like there's a lot to delve in, and it's an ongoing process. And I feel all these artistic tools, they're actually very self-reflective, so it's an ongoing process. And looking forward to more conversations. Thank you, George. Any final thought today?
No, I'm very grateful to be a part of this, to have viewed Kiera's brilliant work, and as well as Michael's. And to echo Nidhi's point, this is a conversation that, we could talk about for so much longer. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thank you.
I just want to give everyone a big group hug right now. And a huge
hope
thank
to see
you to
many of you soon.
Yes.
That's right. So Samita, huge congratulations to you, because you're the mover and shaker behind this. You brought together under so many subjects that we don't get enough of, and certainly all of us here are academics as well as filmmakers. So it's a great opportunity to talk.
I'm honored to receive the submissions, and they both happen to be on this very under-researched and very important topic. So yeah, looking forward to the futures, and huge thanks to all our live audience members.
Yeah, great
Yes,
comments.
from
Pete.
all across the world. Christine from Kingston, Ontario, Diana from Texas, and Sultan also. And thank you, Sultan, for sharing our talk again on Twitter. And looking forward to continuing the conversation. And I wish everybody a fantastic weekend.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
And
Great
talk to you.
comment here on the screen, Kiera.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yes.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well, we could keep talking all night.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
1 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So I'll
Thank
see you
you.
next time. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Much love to you. You're the best, Samita, Nandy. I'll see you soon.